Edmund Burke was one of their gospel speakers with Adam Smith. I hope we've all read Wealth of Nations. It's this equally important lodestar for our domestic policy. So they feared one thing: executive authority to get the country into war. This was universally held, whether it was Alexander Hamilton, who was someone who was for a strong executive, or James Wilson, the first Justice of the Supreme Court, James Iredell, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington. Everyone agreed we cannot have a dispensation that enables the executive to initiate warfare. Every single statement made at the Constitutional Convention, every single statement made in state ratification debates: no executive can rush us into war. We need to put clogs on the artery of war. Not because we're cowards. We wanted to have a strong, invincible defense. That was Richard Goodloe Harper's Millions for Defense, not 1 cent for tribute. But because they knew war had two elements that were a little bit frightening. One, it makes legal what's customarily murder. Now, sometimes you have to go that far, but you need to have something really serious to change that legal framework. The second is, in times of war, the executive becomes the law. The rule of law is no longer king, the executive is. Because the nature of war, that secrecy comes, the power, the fame, the money, the taxes, the contracts, it's all in the executive branch. And that's what they wrote: we cannot have an executive with the authority to get us into war. And George Washington, the very first president, he in fact presided over the Constitutional Convention, himself stated in office, only the Congress can authorize the initiation of offensive warfare. Of course, the Constitution recognized that when you're attacked at Pearl Harbor, you can respond. We're talking about the initiation of warfare. And the reason why the difference is enormous is that when you respond to an actual attack, you have ocular evidence of danger. You don't have to worry about the president concocting weapons of mass destruction or Japanese-American sabotage or whatever to try to justify the use of the military. You have ocular evidence. You don't have that with this preemptive war. Oh, something dangerous is happening. It's all secret. I'm the only one who knows. Just trust me. Just trust me. You know, like the second attack that didn't occur for Vietnam. And not only Washington, when Thomas Jefferson came in and he fought the Barbary pirates, he had authorization, 10 congressional statutes. James Madison went to the War of 1812, so only Congress can decide whether to enter war or not. And not only that, Chief Justice John Marshall, who is heralded for his famous decision, Marbury and Madison, he fought with Washington as Chief Justice. He wrote opinions clearly indicating Congress was supreme over the president. This is during the Adams administration, what you might call a quasi-war with France, and deciding what war taxes were appropriate and what were not. Universally understood. John Quincy Adams, who was the son of John Adams, the 6th President of the United States, the last of the founding generation, gave a magnificent July 4th, 1821 address. He was then Secretary of State to James Monroe. We do not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. We could become the dictatress of the world, but we would destroy our republic as a result. Because all checks and balances vanish in times of war. And we can see that today. Who stands up and says anything, the president? He just says national security, okay. We don't want to second guess it. It doesn't matter whether it's a Democrat or Republican. They all are cowards. Oh, you're weak on terror. Go ahead. Then do what you want to do. John Ashcroft, when he was promoting the Patriot Act, said anybody who criticizes us is giving aid and comfort to the enemy. No, we are infallible. We got it perfectly. This is before the 3,200 violations the FBI made in executing these so-called administrative subpoenas to get our business records. 3,200, no demerits, no sanctions, no censure. The violations come so routinely we get numb to them. Numb to them. We have now a situation where the president invokes state secrets doctrine. Now, where is that in the Constitution, state secrets doctrine? Now, it makes the law really an oxymoron because the doctrine is intended to be an engine of injustice. It says, if you're the victim of a constitutional violation, like being killed, being tortured, being arbitrarily detained for years, you can't win your case. if in order to prevail, you have to show that the culprit was an intelligence agent or there was some security cooperation with a foreign government. It sort of creates an incentive then to commit constitutional wrongs because you're shielded from any retaliation. Shielded. Now, what's wrong? It used to be the case that if the government had a really important national security secret, and that was true after World War II. When we were broke the atomic spies at Los Alamos, there was someone called David Hall, who we knew was complicit because we had cracked the Soviet code called Venona. And in order to avoid alerting the Soviet Union that we'd cracked the code, we decided not to prosecute him. But we said, it's too important for the national security to prosecute. Well, if it's too important to disclose your evidence to someone who's a victim of constitutional violation to the country, then you should claim you've got a default judgment. You should be able to get compensated and redressed. You don't tell them you lose because we're an empire. Because we're an empire. And that's really where we need to come back to the Constitution and the philosophy of the Founding Fathers that I think we've abandoned. I would hope that all, whether you call yourself conservative or liberal, would embrace. The first and perhaps most important that was enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, that the center of the universe in the United States is the individual in freedom, not an American empire. Call this the American Revolution. It was the document for the first time in history said that the purpose of government is to secure unalienable rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, period, end point, nothing further. That exhausts the proper role of government. That's the purpose. The second thing it said that was revolutionary was that we the people are sovereign. Those three words. We the people of the United States. The sovereignty is in us, not in the executive branch, it's not in the Congress, it's in us. They have no power that we haven't given to them.
Amen.
They have no power that we haven't given to them. Now, the third element in their revolutionary thinking was to recognize that they were not there as Don Quixotes to reform the whole world. Not because they were callous, but they knew that endeavor would destroy the internal dynamics that made us a republic. And therefore, they wrote in the Constitution that the mission of the constitutional endeavor was to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Not to Afghanis, Zimbabweans, we wish them well, but it is not our mission. We have no moral obligation to run abroad and save people because they can't organize a government the way that we have. Our mission is to defend the United States, period. And the Founding Fathers acted on that premise. Shortly after we prevailed over the British, there were revolutions that were run in Central and South American, Spanish tyranny, Portuguese. We observed, we said, we wish you well. We didn't intervene, we stayed neutral. We stayed neutral. It's not that people can't volunteer, maybe they can get Nobel Prizes and we could celebrate their humanitarianism. But the fact is, when government gets into that business, it necessarily turns the country into a tyranny because that's what military warfare does. In times of war, the law is silent. Cicero said it. It hasn't changed since then. Now, what does this mean with regard to the post-9/11 dispensation? First of all, we don't glamorize these thugs as warriors. They're criminals, and we should treat them as criminals. We treated Mr. Moussaoui, this 20th hijacker, as a criminal. He was tried as civilian court across the river. We have passed the Classified Information Procedures Act that enables us to prosecute terrorists without disclosing national security secrets. Since 9/11, we've had 200 convictions in terrorism cases and 3 military commission trials. Actually, there only 1 trial, 2 pled guilty. And those are the so-called the worst of the worst. Just think how we're warping our institutions for so little. Never have so many been so frightened over such an insubstantial threat to our existential existence.